Mr. Speaker, could I wish you and all the House and all our staff a very happy New Year? Everybody's agreed? Yeah? Thank you. Just to, Mr. Speaker, I know it seems a long time ago. But just before Christmas, I asked the Prime Minister about the 12,000 people left waiting more than half an hour in the back of an ambulance at A&E departments. She told the House the NHS was better prepared for winter than ever before. So what words of comfort does the Prime Minister have to the 17,000 patients waiting in the back of ambulances in the last week of December? Is it that nothing is perfect by any chance?
I fully accept that the NHS is under pressure over winter. It is regularly under pressure at winter times. I've been very clear. I apologise to those people who've had their operations delayed and to those people who have had their admissions to hospital delayed. But it is indeed the case that the NHS was better prepared this winter than ever before. And it might be helpful. Yes. It might be helpful if I let the House know some of the things that were done in order to ensure that preparedness. More people than ever before having flu vaccines, 2,700 more acute beds being made available since November. For the first time ever, we have seen urgent GP appointments available across the Christmas period across this country. More doctors specialising in treating the elderly in accident and emergency. But the right honourable gentleman mentions the last exchange that we had in this House. In our last exchange, he said mental health budgets have been cut. That is not right. Simon Stevens from the National Health Service has made clear that mental health spending has gone up both in real terms and as a proportion of the overall spending. So will he now apologise for what he previously said?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows full well that CAM's budgets have been raided and that many people that need help are not getting that help. And, Mr. Speaker, we saw on ITV News the other night that nurses are spending their entire shift treating people in car parks because of backed-up ambulances. We know the Prime Minister recognises there's a crisis in our NHS because she wanted to sack the Health Secretary last week but was too weak to do it. And if the NHS is so well-resourced and so well-prepared, why was a decision taken last week to cancel the operations of 55,000 patients during the month of January?
I say to the right honourable gentleman. Well, from the front bench, the Labour Party say apologise. Actually, if he had listened to the answer that I gave to his right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, I've made clear that I have already apologised to those whose operations have been delayed, and we will make sure that those operations are reinstated as soon as possible. We are putting record funding into the NHS and record funding into mental health. But he keeps on about the preparations for the National Health Service. I was very pleased last week to be able to go and say in person a thank you to staff at Frimley Health Trust from both Frimley Park and Wexham Park hospitals for the work that they have been doing to deliver for patients across this period of particular pressure across the winter. Our NHS staff, and that's not just doctors and nurses, it's support staff like radiographers, it's administrative staff, it's porters, it's everybody working in our National Health Service, do a fantastic job day in and day out, and they particularly do that when we see these winter pressures. But in terms of being prepared, this is what NHS providers said only last week. Preparations for winter in the NHS have been more extensive and meticulous than ever before.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, we all thank all NHS staff for what they do, but the reality is that the 55,000 operations cancelled means that those 55,000 people join the already 4 million waiting for operations within the NHS. Perhaps the Prime Minister could listen to the experience of Vicky. Her 82-year-old mother spent 13 hours on a trolley in a corridor. That was on top of the 3 hours between her first calling 999 and arriving at hospital. Vicky says, and I quote, "A volunteer first responder from Warwickshire Heart Service, whose day job is in the army, kept Mum safe until paramedics arrived." Her mother then suffered a heart attack just a week before. This is not an isolated case. Does the Prime Minister really believe the NHS is better prepared than ever for the crisis it's now going through?
First of all, can I say to the right honourable gentleman that nobody wants to hear people having to experience what Vicky and her mother had experienced. And of course, we need to ensure that we learn from these incidents, and that's exactly what we do in the National Health Service. And I'm very happy to ensure that that particular case is looked at, if he would like to provide me with the details of that particular case. But week in and week out in the run-up to Christmas, and now today, what the right honourable gentleman is doing is giving an impression of a National Health Service that is failing everybody that goes to use the NHS. The reality in our NHS is that we are seeing 2.9 million more people now going to accident and emergency. We're seeing over 2 million more operations taking place each year. Our National Health Service is something that we should be proud of, and that's why it's a first-class National Health Service, a first-class National Health Service that has been identified as the #1 health system in the world. That means it's a better health system than Australia, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Canada, Switzerland, Sweden, France, Germany and the United States of America.
Mr. Speaker, we're all on this side of the House very proud of the principle of the National Health Service, healthcare as a human right. But the reality is that in the past year, 565,000 people have spent time on trolleys when they should be treated. The number of elderly people being rushed into A&E from care homes has risen by 62% since the Tories took power. Care Quality Commission figures suggest that nearly a quarter of homes need improvement. Not only is this robbing older people of their dignity, but it's putting pressure on A&Es and on ambulance services. So why, instead of dealing with the social care crisis, has the Prime Minister rewarded the Health Secretary with a promotion and a new job title?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think there are many voices across this House, including those from his own party, who have been encouraging me to ensure that we see better integration between health and social care. I'm pleased that we have recognised this by making the Department of Health the Department for Health and Social Care, and that has been recognised by Age UK, who have said that this is a welcome and long overdue recognition of the interdependence of health and social care. I saw for myself last week at Frimley Park the good work that is being done by some hospitals up and down the country, working with GPs, working with care homes, working with the voluntary sector to ensure that elderly people can stay at home safely and do not need to come into hospital with all the consequences of them coming into hospital beds. That's the way forward. That's what we want to do, ensuring that we're seeing that integration of health and social care at the grassroots level. But the way the right honourable gentleman talks, you would think that the Labour Party had all the solutions for the National Health Service. If the Labour Party have got all the answers, why is it that we see funding being cut, targets not being met in Wales, where the Labour Party is responsible?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister leads a government that's responsible for the funding of national governments such as in Wales. She knows full well what's been cut from Wales. But she is, Mr. Speaker, directly responsible She is, Mr. Speaker, directly responsible for the NHS in England. And giving the Health Secretary a new job title won't hide the fact that £6 billion has been cut from social care under the Tories. Mr. Speaker, part of the problem with our NHS is that its funds are being increasingly siphoned off into private companies, including in the Health Secretary's area of Surrey.
Order, Mr. Shelbrooke, calm yourself, man. You're supposed to be auditioning to become an elder statesman. But there are many more auditions to come on President Evidence. Calm yourself, it will be good for your health. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, even more money is being siphoned out of our NHS budgets into private health companies. Even in the Health Secretary's area of Surrey, a clinical commissioning group was forced to pay money to Virgin Care because it did not win a contract. Will the Prime Minister assure patients that in 2018 less NHS money intended for patient care will be feathering the nests of shareholders in private health companies?
Honourable gentleman, first of all on Wales, this government has given more money to the Welsh Government. It is a decision of Labour in Wales to deprioritise funding for the National Health Service in Wales. And on the issue of the private sector and its role in the health service, under which government was it that private access and private use of private sector in the health service increased? No, it wasn't. No, I tell...
Order. I say to the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, he too is supposed to be auditioning for something. He's normally a very amiable fellow, but he's gesticulating in a very eccentric fashion. He must calm himself. It's not necessary. It's not good for his image. Prime Minister.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, we've put more money into Wales, but the Labour government in Wales has decided to deprioritise funding for the National Health Service. And the increase that was seen in private sector companies working in the health service wasn't under the Conservative government, it was under a Labour government of which the right honourable gentleman was a member.
Jeremy Corbyn!
My honourable friend, the Shadow Health Secretary, is auditioning to be Health Secretary, and he shows real passion for our NHS. Mr. Speaker, under this government, Virgin Care got £200 million worth of contracts in the last year alone, 50% up on the year before. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to understand that it's her policies that are pushing our NHS into crisis. Tax cuts for the super-rich and big business are paid for, yes, Mr. Speaker, they're paid for by longer waiting lists, ambulance delays, staff shortages and cuts to social care. Creeping privatisation is dragging our NHS down. The Health Secretary, during his occupation of her office to keep his job, said he won't abandon the ship. Isn't that an admission that under his captaincy, the ship is indeed sinking?
This government is putting more money into the National Health Service. We see more doctors in our NHS, more nurses in our NHS, more operations taking place in our NHS, more people being treated in accident and emergency in our NHS. But we can only do that. We can only do that if we have a strong economy. And what would we see from the Labour Party? We've turned the economy round from the recession that the Labour Party left us with. What do we know? What do we know about the Labour Party's economic policies? Well, we were told all about them from the description from the Shadow Education Secretary, who I see is not in her place on the front bench today. I do apologise. No, I didn't realise, Mr. Speaker, I did not realise the Shadow Education Secretary was herself undergoing medical treatment. I apologise unreservedly for that comment. But I do have to say that she did describe the economic policies of the Labour Party in unparliamentary terms. It did include the word bust, but she did say that the Labour Party's economic policy was high risk. Now, that means high risk for taxpayers, high risk for jobs, and high risk for our NHS. And that's a risk we will never let them take.